Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be checking out a brand new product from Two Notes. Now I think I've mentioned it in passing before on the channel, although I've never actually shown it, but I've been using this Two Notes Torpedo Captor 16 for really all of my amp recording for about the last year or so now, and I absolutely love this thing. I'd highly recommend this to anyone who has a home studio and, you know, a few amps that they might want to record. Especially if you're in a position where you can't be miking up a cranked 100-watt amp. But we're not here to talk about the Captor 16 today, we're here to talk about its brand new, bigger brother. Now at the time of recording and release of this video, this has just been released as of April 2025. I should just point out that I have paid for this with my own money, I've bought this myself, I have no affiliation with Two Notes, and everything I say is my own thoughts on this product. But with that being said, let's get into it. So this is a Loadbox and an Attenuator. Now I won't get into this too much because this is a topic that could be a whole video in itself, but for those of you that aren't familiar, what a Loadbox and an Attenuator does is it allows you to plug in your amp without damaging it and either record the direct signal out of your amp or reduce the volume or attenuate the level that comes through your cabinet. Now this isn't something I'd normally do, but I'd just like to take a second to talk about how great the packaging is. It comes in this real nice box that's well protected, and it has this really satisfying magnetic seal to it. I know for most of you that's probably really boring, but it was just a nice little touch that I thought was really great, so I thought I'd mention it in this video. But moving over to the actual unit, I'll go through the controls of it first and then I'll demonstrate some of the functionality that it has. So looking at the front panel of the unit, over here we have the power button, or switch I should say. We then have the amp input level, so you can vary depending on what amp you're running into it. Obviously a 100-watt head is going to push it a lot more than say a 15-watt. We've then got the two channels. Now these are both identical. They will take both a line and amp level signal, which is denoted by this small switch here. You've then got the mojo switch. You've got a cab volume control, depth presence, and the output. Now as you can see on the third angle here, I've only got the output turned up, and that's because currently I'm not plugged into a cab, and your mojo control as well as cab volume, depth and presence only work through a cabinet. Now moving over to the back of the unit, I'll throw an overlay of this up on the screen so you can see it a bit better, but on the back you have, going from right to left, your power input. You then have your switchable impedance, which for me was a big part of why I bought this unit. You've then got your amplifier in, and that is rated for 200-watt RMS. You've then got two outputs for cabinets, so you can drive two cabs from this unit, which is great for doing a wet-dry rig, say, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. You've then got your fan, obviously. You've then got an effects loop for both of the channels. Now these give you an option for a pad or boost. They have a switchable dry-wet mix, and then obviously your send and return. You can also control the channels with a foot switch, and there's also a dip switch in the middle there that lets you switch between dual mono and linked, which basically means that you can either go between using the channels independently or them acting as if they were working from one set of controls. You've then got an XLR and a line out for each of the channels. So that's a look at the controls and all the features on this unit, but let's talk about a bit of the functionality and demonstrate some of that. Just for those of you that want to know, I'm using my Gibson SG Standard, and the amp I'm using today, as you will have already seen over on the third angle, is this Marshall SV20H. It's a 20-watt plexi style amp. We've also got a Bosch Dimension C up here, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we get into that and talk about the effects loop. So for this first section of the demonstration, we're going to be talking about using this device in a recording sense. So I currently don't have a cab hooked up to this. I'm just running both channels out through XLR into my Focusrite interface. You can see here the output level I'm using, and I'm adding no extra gain in on the interface. So we'll start off just by demonstrating basically using this as a load box. So at the moment I'm effectively running it in dual mono, so both signals coming out of channel A and B are exactly the same, and although I have the channels panned left and right in Logic, it will sound like it's central because they're the same signal and they will just combine. So just using it purely as a load box can give you something a bit like this. Now I don't think I need to do too much playing because I'm sure you're all familiar with what an SG into a Marshall sounds like, but hopefully that gives you some idea of what recording through this setup sounds like, at least with this particular set of gear. But as you can hear, it sounds like the amp, which is really the end goal. So really up to this point it's a fairly standard Loadbox, although it has 2 channels, which is a bit unusual, but so far it's not doing anything particularly unusual, and something like the Captor 16 will do basically the same job for a fraction of the price. So like your effects loop on your amp, this will give you a place to put your pedals in and get a flavour of the amp in there too. It works in pretty much the same way, and it is basically giving you an effects loop on any amp regardless of whether it has one built in, which is really cool. But it gets even cooler because you can run it in stereo. So like I said a minute ago, I have a Boss Dimension C up here. Now this is a pedal that will take both a stereo input and give you a stereo output. So what I'm doing is I'm running the channel A effects loop through input and output A, and the same for B. And what this means is that then you can get stereo effects through one amp input, which for me is a really cool feature. You might want headphones for this one so you can really hear the stereo spread. So with the Dimension C kicked in, you can get things like this. So hopefully you can hear that movement going from side to side. And obviously you're not limited to just this pedal. Anything that works in stereo will work really well here. So just to demonstrate as well that it really is working in stereo, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch on one of the dry-wet controls, the blend control, and I'm going to make one side dry and one side wet, still with the Dimension C. So in one ear you should be able to hear chorus, and one ear you should hear completely clean guitar. So this really does give you loads of cool options and different things you can do, especially if you're going to venture into using stereo effects. Now of course you aren't limited to running these effects loops in stereo. As I've just proven with that last little demonstration there, you can also run them in parallel, and that gives you some really cool options for doing wet dry rigs or wet dry wet rigs. For those of you who aren't familiar with these terms, it's fairly self-explanatory I think, but you keep one channel in this case, or you can do it with cabinets as well, and then one channel will have your modulations and your reverbs and your delays, that sort of things, anything you'd really refer to as a wet signal going through that. What that does is it gives you some clarity as well as giving you your sort of atmospheric or whatever effects you're trying to use. But I hope so far I've given you some idea of what this unit is capable of in the studio. But I'll now switch over to using a mic'd up cab, and we'll talk a little bit about using this as an attenuator, as well as showing you what those depth presence and mojo functions do. Okay, so we're now using the Reload 2 as an attenuator rather than a Loadbox. That being said, everything I've just demonstrated in the previous section of this video you can do simultaneously at the same time as doing what I'm doing now. So as you can see, I'm still playing the same guitar, and then from the different third angle now you can see that I am still using the same amp and the Loadbox obviously, but this time we are going through an Attenuator 1x12, which is a closed back cabinet and has a cream back in it. That speaker is then mic'd up with a blend of an SM57 and a Sennheiser E906. So you can see in the third angle what I've got the settings on, but everything is at 12 o'clock and the mojo switch is disengaged at the moment, and that gives you something that sounds like this. So just to give you an idea, that's what our bass sounds like coming through this mic setup and the speaker. So we'll start off by engaging the mojo switch. So what that's going to do, to quote 2 Notes, is it gives you a high power feel even at low volumes. So I guess what they're trying to say there is that it makes your amp sound like it's running really loud even when it's at a low volume. So there's not really a good way for me to demonstrate this. Unfortunately, I don't have a dB meter, but I am sat in the room with this amp and you can see where I've got the volume control. Now it's fairly loud in the room, but I definitely wouldn't call it deafening. It might annoy your neighbours slightly, but compared to this 20 watt valve amp when it's on full attack, when it's not got an attenuator in the loop, it's nothing. But so what I'll do, I'll play a little bit and then I'll switch in the Mojo switch and see if you can hear the difference. So to my ear at least, it gives you a little bit more bass end and maybe tightens things up a touch. I don't know whether that comes through with the microphones, but obviously let me know what you think down in the comments. So I'm going to leave that on and we're going to talk about the depth and presence controls. Now, as you might expect, it's fairly self-explanatory and they do the same thing that depth and presence do on pretty much any other amp that comes equipped with them. So depth is going to give you some sculpting of your low end and presence is going to give you some sculpting of the top end. So what I'll do is I'll ring out a chord and then I'll sweep through the knob so you can hear the range and then I'll hit the chord again at the top end. I'll leave the presence at 12 o'clock and we'll start with the depth. And then leaving the depth at 12 o'clock and doing the same with the presence. So I hope that comes through on the microphone setup, but in the room you can definitely hear the difference when you sweep through those controls. And it's just a nice little extra feature to have if you are using this attenuator, especially if you want to mic it up and, you know, tweak your tone ever so slightly and just gives you a bit of an extra EQ option. But that's a quick look at how you can use this device as an attenuator. And really I think that brings us to the end of the video. So far I've been really pleased with this unit and it's definitely an upgrade over the Captor 16 that I have been using. Not to discredit that by any means because that is also a great bit of kit and especially for the price, I mean you can't go wrong or beat it. But this new one with its extra features is really killer, and especially when you consider that it's coming in at around the £850 mark, it's fairly substantially undercutting its competition, like the new Boss Wazatube amp expander, and as well as the Universal Audio aux box, which I think for a while now has been the go-to, the sort of gold standard in this sort of field. But I do really think that Two Notes have smashed it out of the park with this one, and this unit will start to become the gold standard, the go-to, like the aux box has been for the last few years. But there you go, so that's a look at the new Two Notes Reload 2. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments down below. And let me know if you've had any experience with using load boxes on your amps, because I really find that it's my preferred way to record amps actually. But that's all from me, so all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.